Update 3.1 arrives today for Battlefield 2042 with some drastic changes to gunplay, vehicles, objectives and more. So let's jump into these changes, and I'll highlight the ones that will definitely mix up the meta a bit, but also the ones that stood out for us, leaving out some of the more minor changes. We're going to start off with the general fixes, changes and improvements, starting off with the Xbox change that allows crossplay to be enabled or disabled in the option menu. This is very nice, having the option to select to go against the other consoles as well as the PC in your lobbies. There's obviously a bit of a disconnect between controller players and mouse and keyboard players, especially with the hot topic of aim assist in Battlefield 2042. But that does bring us to another change that they've made with the aim assist, adding improvements to ensure that it's more consistent during console gameplay. It doesn't say more than that, so who knows if it's actually a big change or not, but they supposedly have added improvements to it, so we'll have to see how that plays in the actual game. They've also fixed an issue where loadouts would sometimes appear to be empty when spawning after joining a server, which would prevent you from accessing the weapon selection, so that's a good fix as well. And furthermore, the ranger's effectiveness, the combat dog, the robot dog, is actually going to be overall a little bit nerfed, with its effective combat range and overall health decreased. Personally, I think the Rangers were actually incredibly strong, so I think that this adjustment may have actually been needed. Onto a couple audio fixes and tweaks now. They've made different tweaks to the overall audio experience to improve clarity, distance, and directional perception. I think this is an overall very good change. Sometimes I did find it a little difficult to pinpoint the enemy's location based off of the audio, so that should be overall increased a little bit, as well as fixes to issues where soldiers would not actually play their indoor specific footsteps. So if you've ever been completely flanked and you didn't hear any footsteps, hopefully that issue will now be fixed. And next up we have the weapons, where there's quite a few to talk about. First of all is the bounce removed from the under barrel grenade launcher shots when firing at a short distance, so you can basically now noob tube people without that bounce at close range. And on top of that, the 40mm AP grenades are properly now working to damage vehicles, whereas previously they basically did no damage at all, so it'll be interesting to see just how effective those AP grenades now are. They've also fixed some issues where weapons were displaying the wrong ammo counts. It's a minor change there, but I've definitely noticed it in my playthrough, so I'm happy to see that one. The sniper rifles, the DXR-1 and the NTW-50, these are the bolt-action rifles, have had their reload animation increased by 0.2 seconds. They've also adjusted the dispersion values for most weapons. That basically means when tap firing or doing short controlled bursts, it will actually decrease the dispersion quicker, which makes tap firing and controlled burst firing more effective. And then on top of that, again, they've also adjusted dispersion increases for most weapons, making it slightly longer for weapons to become overly inaccurate when in sustained fire, so overall reducing deviation or bloom, however you want to call it. They've also adjusted the recoil values for preventing overly aggressive recoil jumps from the AK-24, the LCMG, the PKB-BP, the SFARM-GL, as well as the PP-29, so a lot of big recoil changes across the board, as well as improved hipfire accuracy for all SMGs to make them stand out better from other automatic weapon types, which is very interesting because the SMGs are already so powerful in the game, so hip firing will now be even stronger on them. But it doesn't end there. The LMGs are also getting some love, with their dispersion and recoil lowered to improve performance when continuously firing, which if you are an LMG fan and you like using those in your Battlefield, that is a really good thing to hear. They've also made improvements to recoil control for all weapons, specifically the automatic weapons. They've also increased the close range damage and consistency of the MCS 880 when using the buckshot shells or the flechette shells. And finally, for weapon-specific changes, you may have noticed a bug where when using the SFARM or the K30 assault rifles, that they would actually fire below your aim, which should now be fixed as well in this patch. Moving on now to vehicles, where there's also been some big changes. They fixed a bug where your vehicle weapons sometimes didn't deal blast damage on a direct hit. This is quite a big deal. A lot of times it could take 10 or 11 shots, even with a 30mm cannon, because you're getting direct hits which didn't proc the splash damage to do that additional extra damage around the target and onto the target, so that is quite a big change. This change overall is a potential massive buff to the vehicle weapons, but I guess to compensate they've already thought of that and have actually implemented quite a few nerfs to a lot of the ground vehicle cannons. So starting off with the ground vehicle 30mm cannon effectiveness has been completely reduced across the board to infantry, making it overheat faster, have slightly reduced rate of fire, reduced blast damage, and also bigger damage fall off over a distance. You can see the stats on the screen now that are changing. Quite a big nerf there. They've also made changes to the LCAA Hovercraft's 40mm grenade launcher. They've reduced the blast damage from 55 down to 35, quite a big drop there, but they've also made the 40mm utility pod be easier to fire at upwards angles. They've also made a change to the Wildcat's 57mm cannon to reduce its dispersion, which is definitely a good thing, but also to lower the ammo from 12 to 8, as well as reduce the impact and blast damage quite substantially. So overall, quite a lot of nerfs to the vehicles, and I think it's fair to say that vehicles are reigning supreme on a lot of the matches and in the different maps, but I don't necessarily think it's because vehicles are overpowered. I think it's because the maps are quite wide and open with few areas to cover in between, so they often end up racking up a lot of kills and frustrating a lot of people. So vehicle nerfs and weapon buffs across the board. But there's also some gadget changes, quite significant changes here as well. The frag grenade has an increased time to detonate by 0.3 seconds after its first bounce. They've also increased the damage of frag grenades to deal 120 damage, which will guarantee kills on armored players. And they've also reduced the frag grenade and incendiary grenade maximum ammo count from 2 to 1. The gadget changes aren't finished just yet though. They have made quite big tweaks to the proximity sensor, which I think we're all familiar with because it's so powerful. They've reduced the spotting radius from 30 meters to 20 meters. They've also lowered the uptime from 30 seconds to 14 seconds and reduced it from carrying 2 to 1. So a massive nerf to the proximity sensor. I still think it will be a powerful tool, but it might encourage people to take some of the other grenade variants, like the smoke grenades, which are very strong on game modes like Breakthrough. Speaking of Breakthrough, there's also been some pretty drastic changes to Kaleidoscope, Orbital, and Hourglass, with the rooftop capture objectives being completely removed, and instead they're adding either 2 or 1 capture objective at the bottom of these building areas. So rooftops on Breakthrough are pretty much not going to be a thing anymore. And then the final big change is if you've ever been killed by an invisible player. That sometimes happened if you spawned on a vehicle that was either full or destroyed. Well, that has now been fixed, so no more deaths to invisible players. That's the end of the patch notes. Let me know what you think of them in the comments down below. Don't forget to drop a like and subscribe if this video helped you out.